Sales development representatives, it's a tough job. They're typically the first ones to get cut. If you have a
Yeah.
good marketing, the outbound will work a lot better. Cold calling is still an effective channel because using AI and cold calling is illegal.
This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejicio. Outbound sales is one of those areas of tech where everyone wants results, but very few teams get it right. Today's guest is John Karsant, a sales operator and entrepreneur who spent years deep in the trenches of B2B outbound, pipeline creation, and sales development. John is the founder of LevelUp Leads, an SDR and outbound sales company helping startups and growth stage teams build predictable pipeline without burning out their internal sales orgs. In a world where inboxes are crowded, buyers are more skeptical than ever, and AI is changing how outreach is done, LevelUp Leads is tackling a very real problem. How do you run outbound in a way that actually works, consistently, ethically, and at scale? In this episode, we will talk about John's path into sales and tech, what pushed him to start LevelUp Leads, the mistakes companies keep making with SDRs and outbound, and how he thinks about the future of sales development in an increasingly automated world. John, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for the intro, Mateo. I appreciate it.
John, tell us about your journey into sales and tech. What were some formative experiences that eventually led you to start LevelUp Leads? And how did you first get into B2B sales development?
So out of college, I played college tennis, and after that, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. At some point, I was forced to pick a major, which was marketing communications, but I was really focused on tennis in college. And then when it came time to graduate, I just stayed in tennis. So I did that. I worked at a few different jobs. I ended up teaching tennis for a bit, but ultimately, about 7 or 8 years after, not quite that, but probably about 5 years after graduating, I was like, I don't want to teach tennis for the rest of my life. At some point, I needed to pull the plug and go do something different. So I quit. I moved down to Argentina. I had saved up some money and I was going to go travel around South America and learn Spanish. So I moved to Argentina, and in that process, I met a girl who is now my wife. But in order to stay down there, I at some point needed income. So I decided I needed to start looking for jobs after about 8 or 9 months of being down there. It's like it was time. So I just lucked out. I don't know why, but someone took a chance on me. Someone back in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where I grew up, needed their first sales development representative. And they chose me. And they were all about working remote, which I needed at the time and which wasn't that common. Back in this is 2015. It was difficult to find a remote job. So they hired me, and they were doing solar lead generation for residential solar in the United States. And my job was to sell to the actual solar companies, and we would provide them the leads. So that was my break into the sales world, the lead generation world, and it was to this day one of the best experiences I ever had because they really allowed, I was one of the, it was a small team. I was the first sales hire, and they really let me wear a lot of hats. And while it wasn't the most fun at the time, it was really good experience. So I got to do everything from lead generation, sales, contracts, project management. I was helping charging the clients, refunding the clients, like all those things. Like it's just tough to find a job like that. And in the future, when I ended up starting Level Up Leads, that was the job where I felt like I had the most experience. They really kind of like took this training wheels off and let me mess up, and it was okay. So I'll pause there, but there was some other jobs after that which I could get into, but that's how I ultimately broke into the remote tech sales world.
It's an amazing story, and I love the relocation story and the there's always there's always a partner, someone, a girl or whatever that pulls you to a region of the world. That I think that's an amazing story. But I also want to get into were you so you had some marketing background, some communications background, but when you started doing sales, did they give you any training or anything, or did you figure things on your own, trying different things? How were those first activities?
So there was some training, but it was also just learning on the fly, right? We were a very small team. And so I did go and meet them in person and did a little bit of shadowing. And then after a few months, they let me go off on my own. I will say the person that was training me did give me some really good tips and had me do an external training as well. And so I started to learn uh, more and more about sales in the solar space. I will say, people ask me like, how did you go from tennis into that, like into sales? And I always say like, it's kind of funny, but there is a sales aspect to teaching tennis because you need to teach the client. There's an experience to that lesson. You need to get repeat business. You need to fill your calendar. So it's just like a different way of doing sales in teaching tennis, but it's like you build a reputation, you get referrals, and so it's kind of similar. So,
How
anyways,
many years? How many years were you? So it was a quite an episode in your life. I mean, how many years were you teaching tennis?
about 4 or 5.
4 or 5. How big? How many clients at the same time did you had in your peak?
Um, it's hard to say. So you do a mix of clinics where there's multiple people, then you have private lessons, you have some junior camps. A full day would typically be weekends because I worked at some hotels, I worked at some country clubs, but a full day would be like 6 lessons in a day. So 6 hours on court
Ooh.
plus a little bit of other stuff. So that would be a full day, and then during the week was a little lighter. You'd be on court for maybe 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours.
And some customers, I imagine this is just a preconception, right? But I imagine that there's also a lot of psychology in how you deal with your trainees in terms of are they getting things right? Not. There's a lot of frustration. It's sort of an individual sport. There's a lot that goes in the mind when you're playing and teaching tennis, right?
Just like if you're in sales, you kind of need to read the person you're talking to, what's important to them. You need to ask certain questions. It was the same thing when teaching tennis, and you needed to understand what that person was there for. Did they just want some exercise? And they just wanted someone to hold them accountable? Did they want all the knowledge? Were they just all about the knowledge and that was what's most important to them? So you kind of need to feel out what was important to them and then deliver that to them in their lesson. And everyone's different. So everyone was showing up for different reasons, and so it was my job to figure that out.
I think that's amazing. When you founded LevelUp Leads, what specific problem were you trying to solve for companies in terms of outbound prospective and pipeline generation?
So when I started LevelUp Leads, I previously was working at a different lead generation company, and I started LevelUp Leads doing specifically list building for companies. And so what that is I would go out and build the contact list that they wanted to target, their ideal customer profile of companies, titles, and I'd build that out for them and pass them the list. What I found though, the issue with that was that it was a one-time sale. So yeah, some people came back, but it wasn't a reoccurring sale. And our customers wanted more value. They wanted more of the process to be done for them. That was just a small part. And over time, I realized they don't want just the list being built. They want to take it a step further. They want the meetings actually being set for them, and they're willing to pay for it. So what I started doing over time is started rolling out more services where it wasn't just the list building, but I started doing email outreach, LinkedIn outreach, and ultimately cold calling. So I was actually booking meetings in my client's calendar, and that was a lot more valuable to them, and they're willing to pay for it.
So um, how did you build up the team? How were those first days, and how long did you? Because you went from doing it yourself to creating a company, and those are two different things, right? It's one thing when you're doing it yourself as an individual contributor, but then you were creating a team and a company, and the company kept growing, and it's a sizable company today and very successful. Tell me a little bit about that process and how did you manage to scale from yourself to really building a team and a company?
hmm So in the beginning days, it was I started the company with my wife, and she would kind of help with some of the back end stuff. And over time, I started hiring some people to help with some of the back end stuff, but I was still responsible for the lead generation, making the sales, and then I was also doing the fulfillment aspect, helping with the client campaigns and delivering the results. I basically did that and maxed myself out until I like couldn't work anymore. I was so burnt out because of doing all the different processes. Like it was became a challenge. So I was able to get the company up to around 40 or 50K MRR on my own. And that was my tipping point where I realized I need to hire some people. Like I can't continue to work more hours in the day. So at that point, I hired another salesperson. I started getting people on the back end, customer success managers to help with the fulfillment. And so that was the point when I started getting the team in place. And it was one of the best decisions ever because over time I could start stepping back a little bit and allow them to take some of the work off my plate.
That's amazing. And for the benefit of the audience, how big is the company today?
So today we're about 60 people. So quite a big team. I wish it was smaller, but that's just the line of work we're in, and we're a people-oriented business.
And all of this happened during the last, what, 5 years?
Yep, I started the company 5 years ago.
It's an amazing story. Um, so the agency today, it blends, like you said, cold calling, email, LinkedIn, fractional SDR teams, managed campaigns. Can you walk us through how LevelUp Leads approaches outbound differently than traditional lead list providers or internal SDR teams?
Um, so I've been in the space a while, and I think one of the most important things is the discovery leading up to the actual sale. What is the company? What do they actually need? Where is the downfall in the process? Are they just a company and they have 300 other competitors? Like, what are we getting ourselves into? What are their goals? And what are the expectations around it? Because I've been doing this long enough that I have a good sense on what is realistic and what isn't. So if they're not lined up with expectations of what we think we can deliver, it's easy for us to be like, look, this isn't going to work. I would recommend starting with this channel or pass them to somebody else. So the discover is really important for setting expectations. So then we know it's a good fit. We also know, or this is something I would ask, is what is the average deal size? Our clients need to have a big enough deal size for us to be able to give them a return on investment. The bigger the deal size, the less meetings we need to book. The smaller the deal size, the more meetings we need to book for this to make sense. So those are important numbers to back out and figure out with the client um, before we actually start the engagement. So that I think is number one is like we can clearly, I think a lot of companies are desperate for the revenue and they'll just take on anybody. We're able to actually almost consult in a sense. We have all the tools. We can go in and be like, look, this is how big your total addressable market is. These are the campaigns I suggest you start with. These are the channels I suggest you start with. You can always scale up or down. So there's a bit of a consulting aspect that goes into this as well. Um, there's other certain things we do in terms of our delivery that's a bit different, but I think I think the assessment ahead of time is probably one of the things we have the most experience in.
And as you continue growing your relationship with your clients, do you think they looking back they realize how important that discovery session was and how that enabled their success?
Certainly. Yeah. Also, I would say some people have the mindset of, okay, I'm going to hire this company and the meetings are going to happen right away. But what we have to do is explain to them that this is a test. This
Right.
isn't something where it's like we can say the results are going to be guaranteed. If they've never done outbound before, we have no KPIs or benchmarks to go off of. So they're using us to test the market
Right.
rather than, and that happens in the sales process, is we can say, okay, look, this is going to be a test. These are when if campaign A is not working, then we'll make an adjustment to campaign B. But it's not like you just flip on a switch and the meetings happen right away. We're actually helping you discover what's the right messaging, who are the right people to target within these companies. And so there's a bit of discovery and testing that goes into some of these campaigns.
Is that one of the biggest misconceptions you encounter about outbound sales development? People feeling like, okay, I turn on the switch and that's it?
100%. Yeah. So sales development representatives, uh, it's a tough job. Uh, they're typically the first ones to get cut also, which is unfortunate. Um, if you look online, you look at studies, it's typically 6+ months for internal companies, internal SDRs at companies to start seeing an ROI. But when you outsource, they're wanting results within the first few weeks. And so it's like there's a it
Hmm.
doesn't always line up with expectations. So um, there's not a ramp time that we have with them because we don't charge for onboarding. But you also need to let outbound play out a little bit. You know,
Yeah,
I always tell clients it's kind of like a basketball series or a baseball series that you have game one and you win or lose game one and you learn from what happened, right? You watch the film and then you come into game two with a different game plan if you lost. And it's the same thing with outbound. If you have a game plan for to start and that doesn't work, well, you're not going to keep doing the same thing. You have to switch it up and you come up with another game plan, but you also have to allow for time for that to play out. You
yeah.
can't say, oh, campaign A didn't work out, let's stop, right? You have to allow for ch adjustments.
Um, this is a great point, and I struggle with this personally as well. Um, how long is it reasonable? The image that always comes to mind, I don't know if you have this image in your mind of there's like this picture of this guy with an axe picking at the earth, right? And there's like a diamond and he doesn't see it and like he feels like he's going to give up, but the diamond is actually close, but you don't see it, so you don't know where the diamond is, right? How long is too long? Do you have a formula, or it depends really on the industry, the client, the discovery phase, and everything that you went through? Or do you have like a pulse on it's going to typically take XYZ months, and then if we start seeing something pick up, and then we know,
Yeah, it does depend a little bit, partly on the types of companies we're trying to reach out to and how important is one deal. Also, what kind of traction have we got so far? Is it zero? Is it a little bit? And so like it depends on the information we're getting. Typically, when we start an engagement, we say, okay, we're going to run this first campaign for 3 weeks. If nothing's working, hey, I mean, sometimes it works right away. You don't have to touch anything, which is great. But
yep,
oftentimes you need to tweak things. So if nothing's working by week three, then we're making adjustments that it could be changing the script. It could be changing the targeting. Maybe they have multiple offers and they're in products, and so they want to change what they're actually pitching. There's lots of adjustments that happen along the way.
and I imagine as well, sales is not only about the salesperson or the SDR, it's also about what you're selling, right? Have you had tough conversations where you have to confront customers or potential customers or whatever in terms of, hey, maybe the issue is there's not a market fit or something like that?
Yeah, how do you do that in a polite way? Um, so yeah, I mean, sometimes there's that. Sometimes it's the company. So there's you're doing outbound, but there's more to it than that, right? If you receive an email and it kind of piques your interest, logically, you go look at the website or you go look at their LinkedIn. But
Yep.
what happens if the website looks like it was done 20 years ago? You kind of lose credibility, right? Like, so if you're not at least don't have some of the other parts up to speed with today's world, sometimes your outbound campaigns might not hit
Yeah.
because of certain other things. You don't look professional. You're not showing up. You don't have reviews online, things like that. So there's other parts that come into play. So you might make a judgment call once you go to that website about whether or not you want to go back to that email and respond based on the website, right? So some stuff's out of our control. So we do recommend saying, hey, look, we can start the engagement, but here's what I recommend is I would get your website up to give it a facelift, get it up to speed, like look professional. Even if you don't work with us, this is going to benefit you in the long run.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's some consulting there on other aspects, because sometimes your outbound's as good as your marketing. If you have a
Yeah.
good marketing, the outbound will work a lot better. If there's no marketing, it's going to be harder.
Have you ever considering expanding into that as well? Or has anyone asked you like, hey, can okay, you're telling me I need to improve my marketing, collaterals, image, whatever, social media, content. Have you ever considered expanding?
Not that specifically, I would have refer them out, but I have considered other options like there was a time when we had SEO in-house. We no longer do. We refer it out. We just kind of realized, well, we work with a partner, but there's because those SEO and PPC and outbound can work together pretty well.
Right.
But if it's something like website design or someone's like, hey, I want custom software development, I'm going to be like, you need to talk to Mateo, right? I know people in the space that you should talk to. We don't do that in-house. Like it would be too hard to build that up and deliver that service and compete with others in this space.
Yeah. And that it's amazing, right? That's sometimes as a founder, strategy is a lot about what things you say no to and not only what you say yes to, right?
Yeah. But I think as a business owner and CEO, you always need to be evaluating ideas, right? If you're stuck in your ways and you're not going to change anything, well, maybe you'll get left behind. So I think you need to have a bit of an open mind, keep some doors open, and maybe test out a few things. Be willing to lose some money as you test, because you may find something in the direction of your company may totally change.
Yeah. So we live in an era of AI and automation. Um, Sales continues to look like one area where the human connection matters and makes a difference. What are your thoughts there in terms of when the human makes a difference, or how do you leverage that piece versus automation and AI for level up leads?
So AI is helping in a lot of ways, but it's also hurting in a lot of ways in the outbound space. I think it's a big reason why email has become harder and harder as a channel. Doesn't mean it can't work, but it's just if it's so much easier now to get the data and run the campaigns due to AI. I think it's one of the reasons why cold calling is still an effective channel is because using AI and cold calling is illegal. So it's one of the areas where the human element still is at play. That I
Right.
can call you, have a conversation. You may not be happy about the call. It may be perfect timing, but I can at least learn that are you the right person? Is this something uh, you guys just make a decision on once a year? If so, when, right? Are you using a competitor? And like I can learn things through that conversation that I wouldn't have learned in an email or a LinkedIn message. That is one of the ways I still think the human element is present. Other things like conferences and relationships, like that is still not still, but is becoming uh, more and more important because it's cutting through the noise of all the AI and whatnot, and you're getting a personal intro, which I think you're skipping the line, going to the front door, and I think those sales are
Yeah.
becoming much easier to make.
Um, Looking ahead, what is your vision for Level Up Leads as outbound and sales development evolves? And how do you plan to stay ahead in trends of pipeline creation, best practices, client success?
Well, I'm keeping an open mind on it because of all the moving aspects and outbound and legal things, and so it's something we're keeping an eye on. Luckily, cold calling is still it's still a need, and people talk about, oh, email's dead, cold calling's dead, all these things, but it's like people still need to make sales as a company. So
Yeah.
you're limiting the avenues that can be done. So I still think some of these are going to remain around for a while. because what other options do you have? It's starting to cut out a lot of the channels that people make sales, and sales is really how companies stay afloat and grow. Um, anyways, there's other things too. I'm exploring different offerings within the space. So that could be a lower tier level offer. A lot of our inbound leads simply can't afford our lowest level package, which starts at around 5K. So thinking of offering what does a lower level package look like? How do we deliver that?
Right.
Also a higher level package, right? More of an account-based marketing, things like that, or targeting. How do we deliver that? And then also there's becoming more and more of a need of something like a go-to-market engineering service, some operations in AI. And so I'm thinking about what would that look like if we were to offer that as a service. But at this point, it's just thoughts. But those are some of the things I'm thinking of to stay ahead.
Exciting times. John, if anyone is listening and wants to get in touch with you, how do they go about that?
The best way is I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, John Karsant. You can find me there, or go to my website, levelupleads.io.
John, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. Let's stay in touch. Like I told you, I will be visiting Spain later in the year. Maybe we can find time to get together, or maybe in the US or wherever you are in the world. I know you are a world citizen, a cosmopolitan traveler. So thank you again. It's always good to have a conversation with you.
Thanks, Mateo. Appreciate it.